He said it the way a man reads a weather report. Not angry, not cruel. Just certain, in the way of someone stating a thing they have long since stopped questioning. They were at the dinner table, the long oak one in the Hargreave dining room, the one that seated 12 and usually seated 3, and the candles had been lit even though it was not yet dark outside, because that was how his mother preferred it. Mrs. Hargreave the elder had preferences about candlelight the way she had preferences about everything, quietly absolute, and enforced without ever quite being spoken aloud. Eleanor had been passing the bread. She manages well enough, Nathaniel had said to his mother, as though Eleanor were not sitting directly across from him. That was the point of her. She set the bread basket down without a sound. She did not look up. She did not cry. She had learned very early in this house that tears were a form of information she was not prepared to share. But she felt it move through her, the sentence, the specific flatness of it, the point of her, the way cold water moves through a room when a window is opened in winter. Complete, thorough, impossible to argue with because it hadn't been offered as an argument. It had been offered as a fact. Mrs. Hargreave the elder, Margaret, though Eleanor had never once been invited to call her that, reached for the salt without comment. The candles burned. Eleanor folded her napkin. She placed it on the table beside her plate, with the careful precision of a woman who had decided, somewhere between the soup and the bread, that she was finished. Not with the meal, with the arrangement. She excused herself quietly, which was the only way she ever excused herself in that house, and she went upstairs, and she began to pack. She had come to the Hargreave house 2 years ago from a situation that her own family had described as difficult, and that Eleanor would have described, if pressed, as the particular kind of difficulty that wears a polite face. Her father, Dr. Edmund Reed, had been a respected physician in Halifax, with a practice he had built over 30 years, and a bookkeeping system he had trusted entirely to a man who had not deserved that trust. By the time Eleanor understood what had happened, the practice was gone, the house on Barrington Street was gone, and her mother was looking at her across the kitchen table of a borrowed room with an expression that Eleanor was not going to make her hold for any longer than necessary. The Hargreaves were a good family. That was what everyone said. Old Nova Scotia money, timber and shipping, a house outside Wolfville that had stood for 4 generations. Nathaniel Hargreave was 31, responsible, respected, and everyone agreed on this with the specific emphasis of people not mentioning something. Not married. The arrangement had been made quickly, the way necessary things are made quickly when all parties understand that speed is itself a form of mercy. Eleanor had walked into that marriage with both eyes open. She had not expected love. She had expected something she would later come to understand was both simpler and more difficult than love. To be treated as though she was there. 2 years had taught her that expectation was precisely what the Hargreave household was not designed to accommodate. She packed the way she had learned to do everything in that house. Efficiently, without waste, without visible feeling. The gray wool dress and the blue one, practical both. Her mother's cameo, which had survived everything and would continue to. Her medical reference books, 4 of them, which Nathaniel had once looked at with a faint expression she hadn't been able to name until later. Surprise, she'd decided eventually, as though he'd just discovered the furniture could read. Her savings she kept in the lining of her smallest travel bag, coins set aside carefully over 24 months from the household accounts she managed. Not stolen, never that. Simply claimed, the way a woman claims the only thing that is unambiguously hers. The careful daily portion of her own future. There was a knock at the door. Eleanor. Her mother's voice, soft and careful. Come in. Frances Reed was 63 and looked, Eleanor always thought, like a woman who had decided some years ago that she had survived enough that she was no longer frightened of very much. She came in and saw the bag on the bed and the wardrobe standing half open, and she did not say anything for a long moment. How long have you been planning this? She asked. I haven't been planning it. Eleanor smoothed a folded blouse and placed it in the bag. I've been ready for it. It's different. Frances came further in and closed the door behind her. She watched her daughter with the particular attention of a woman who understood exactly what she was seeing. Where will you go? Do you remember the letter Mrs. Okafor sent last spring? Her cousin has a practice in Pictou County. A small town called Ard. They've been without a physician's assistant for 8 months. Eleanor kept her eyes on her packing. I can read a medical ledger. I can keep records, manage appointments, prepare correspondence. I can be useful. You are useful here. No. Eleanor looked up. I am convenient here. I've told you, Mama. There is a difference. Frances was quiet. From below distantly came the sound of Mrs. Hargreave's voice giving some instruction to the housemaid. Something about the table linens. He didn't mean it the way it sounded, Frances said. She said it the way someone says a thing they don't quite believe, because some part of them still hopes that not believing it fully is the same as it not being true. Eleanor folded a stocking and set it neatly in the bag. He meant it exactly the way it sounded. That's the problem. She paused. He said it the way you'd describe a tool you'd purchased for its function. She manages well enough. That was the point of her. She closed the bag with a quiet final click. I have kept this household for 2 years, Mama. I have managed his accounts and organized his correspondence, and made sure his mother's criticisms were smoothed over before they reached him. I have given him a home that runs without him having to think about it. And the truest thing he can find to say about me, to his mother in front of you, is that I serve a point. She picked up the bag. I am done serving a point. Frances looked at her daughter for a long moment. Then she crossed the room and took both of Eleanor's hands in hers. Take me with you, she said quietly. I was about to ask the same thing, Eleanor said. They were down the back stairs and out through the kitchen garden before the dinner dishes had been cleared. Eleanor left a note on the writing desk in Nathaniel's study. It was short and composed entirely without performance. Nathaniel, I am leaving. Please do not look for me. The household accounts are in order through the end of the month. The correspondence file on your desk is organized by date. E. Reed Hargreave. She had almost added something about the bread. She had decided against it. The August air outside was heavy and salt-edged, the particular Halifax humidity that announced itself like a declaration. Eleanor walked without looking back at the house. She walked the way a woman walks when she is going somewhere, not fleeing something. The distinction mattered. She had held it in her mind the whole time she was packing, like a lamp kept carefully upright so it wouldn't go out. Frances fell into the step beside her without a word, her own small bag tucked under her arm, her hat already in place. Did you arrange transport? There's a coach north on Thursday mornings. Mrs. Okafor's cousin wrote that Ardmore is a day's ride from Truro. Eleanor glanced at her mother. We'll stay at the inn on Granville Street tonight. And tomorrow? Tomorrow we get on the coach. Eleanor adjusted her bag on her shoulder. I have waited longer for worse things. Frances almost smiled. Yes, she said, you have. It was Mrs. Finch, the housemaid, who noticed first. She found the study door open, the note on the desk, both the guest rooms empty. She stood for a moment in the doorway of Eleanor's bedroom and looked at the orderly space, the made bed, the swept writing surface, the wardrobe closed and latched, and understood before she could fully put it into words that the woman who had made it that way was not coming back to it. She went to find Mr. Hargreave. He was in the sitting room with his papers and his second glass of port, exactly where he was every evening after dinner. Mr. Hargreave. She stopped. Mrs. Hargreave has gone, sir. He looked up. Gone where? I believe. Away, sir. She's left a note. He found the note where she'd said it was. He read it once. He read it again. The correspondence file on your desk is organized by date. He set it down. He stood with both hands flat on the desk and looked at the middle distance for a moment that stretched longer than he was comfortable with. He was a methodical man. He arranged things in his mind the way he arranged the timber contracts on his desk, in order of priority, by date, by outcome. This did not arrange itself, Nathaniel. His mother appeared in the doorway. What has happened? Eleanor has left. A beat of silence. Left. She doesn't say where. He tucked the note into his breast pocket. Mrs. Hargreave crossed the room and sat in the chair by the window with the composed expression of a woman who is thinking something she hasn't decided yet whether to say. She'll come back, she said, finally. Where would she go? She has nothing. She has her mother. He turned to the window and apparently she has somewhere to be. Nathaniel, you cannot simply. She asked me not to look for her. He said it quietly. I think that's fairly clear. He left before she could answer. He went to bed, which was the sensible thing to do, and he did not sleep, which was the honest thing to say. He lay in the dark of the room that had always been his alone and listened to the house around him in a way he had not listened before. It was quiet. It was perfectly, entirely quiet. And beneath that quiet, he became aware. Slowly, the way you become aware of something you have been looking at for a long time without seeing. That the house had always been this quiet, which meant someone had always been keeping it this way, and he had never once thought to ask who. The coach north took 9 hours. Eleanor spent most of them looking out the window at the landscape changing from coastal gray to the particular green of the interior, and trying not to think about whether she had made the right decision, because she had made the right decision and thinking about it too hard would not change that, but would make her tired. Frances slept against her shoulder for the last 3 hours. Eleanor kept still so she wouldn't wake her. She thought about Ardmore instead. What Mrs. Okafor's letter had said. A good community. People who look after their own. The doctor is getting on in years and the work is more than one man can manage well. She thought about what it might mean to be useful in a way that was acknowledged. To sit across a desk from someone and have them speak to her, not around her. She had read the letter twice and folded it into her mother's Bible. It was, she had decided, enough of an invitation. Ardmore was smaller than she'd expected and more beautiful. Set into a valley between two ridges of old maple and birch. With a main street that managed to be both practical and unhurried. And a quality of light in the late afternoon that made everything look as though it had been there long enough to be certain of itself. The first person they encountered was a woman in her 60s hanging washing on a line beside the inn, who looked at them with the frank, appraising kindness of someone who had seen enough of the world to know what two women arriving with small bags and no escort meant, and who wasn't going to make it harder for them. "You'll be looking for Dr. Fenwick," she said. It wasn't quite a question. "He's at the office on Main Street, past the post office, before the hardware." She looked at Eleanor's bag. "You staying?" "That remains to be seen," Eleanor said. The woman nodded as though this was a perfectly sensible answer. "I'm Mrs. Doyle. I have the 2 rooms upstairs if you need them. Fair price." Dr. Herbert Fenwick was not what Eleanor had imagined, though she couldn't have said precisely what she had imagined. He was perhaps 70, with a face that had been shaped by decades of being the person people called when things went wrong, and the particular steadiness of a man who had learned to be frightened less by circumstances than by his own potential inadequacy. He looked up from a ledger that looked like it had not been organized in some years. "You'll be Mrs. Okafor's connection," he said. "Eleanor Reed, Eleanor Hargreave." She corrected it without thinking, and then wondered, standing there, whether that would still be true in 6 months. He looked at her for a moment. "Your husband know you're here?" "My husband knows I'm gone. The details are my own business." Something in his face settled. "Can you read a medication ledger?" "My father was a physician. I read medical ledgers before I read novels." "Can you manage appointment correspondence?" "I have 73 patients, and I've been answering letters by hand since March. I can manage correspondence, appointment scheduling, supply orders, and patient record organization. I can also take patient histories and preliminary vitals, if that's of use." She looked at him steadily. "Dr. Fenwick, I am here because I am capable, and because I need honest work and a place where my mother can rest. That is the beginning and the end of my situation." He was quiet for a moment. The clock on the wall ticked. "There's a boarding room 2 doors down," he said. "Widow Marsh keeps it fair. We can start with the correspondence backlog in the morning if you're willing." "I'm willing," Eleanor said. 3 days into Ardmore, Eleanor understood something she had not let herself name while she was living inside the Hargreave house. She had been making herself small, not deliberately, not with any single decision she could point to, but slowly, incrementally, the way a river redirects over years without anyone noticing until the original bed is dry. She had managed and organized and smoothed and adjusted and made everything run so well that no one had thought to ask how it was running, or who was running it, or whether the person doing it might have opinions of her own. The window that opened was Dr. Fenwick setting a stack of 37 unsorted patient files on the desk in front of her and saying, "I don't know where to begin with these," and then actually waiting to hear what she would say. She told him. It took her 20 minutes. She sorted the files by the 3 most urgent categories: chronic conditions requiring immediate follow-up, outstanding referral letters, and new patients without complete histories, and explained her reasoning for each categorization with the clear, specific logic of someone who had been applying that logic for years without ever being invited to make it visible. Dr. Fenwick sat back in his chair and looked at her over his reading glasses, with the expression of a man revising a number he thought was settled. "Mrs. Okafor said you were organized," he said. "Mrs. Okafor was being modest," Eleanor said, and went back to the files. Word moved through Ardmore, the way word moves through small communities. Not by announcement, but by the quiet, efficient network of people who know each other well enough to know what matters. By the end of the first week, 4 people who were not Dr. Fenwick's patients had found reasons to stop by the office. A farmer worried about his wife's persistent cough. A young woman who needed a letter written to a specialist in Halifax. A man whose elderly father required coordinated care that no one had yet thought to coordinate. A mother who wanted to understand her son's prescription and had been too embarrassed to ask the doctor directly. Eleanor listened to all of them. She took notes. She did not promise what she could not deliver. She did not offer comfort where information was more useful. She referred what needed to be referred, and handled what she could handle herself, and by the end of the second week, she had more work than she'd had in 2 years of keeping the Hargreave house. Francis watched all of it, with the steady collecting attention of a woman building a case. He had no idea, she said one evening, while Eleanor was reviewing the day's correspondence by lamplight. Eleanor didn't look up. "No, did you?" Eleanor set down her pen. She looked at the lamp for a moment. "I knew what I was capable of," she said. "I think I had simply forgotten that it was allowed to matter." Frances reached across the table and covered Eleanor's hand with her own. She said nothing else. She didn't need to. Back in Halifax, things were not going smoothly. It was not that the Hargreave house had fallen apart. Mrs. Finch was competent, and the cook was reliable, and the basic mechanics of the household continued to function. But there was a difference, a quiet, particular, impossible-to-name difference, between a house that is maintained and a house that is run. Eleanor had run it. She had not merely organized its operations. She had understood it as a living thing, had anticipated its needs, had managed the 100 invisible calibrations that prevented small problems from becoming large ones. Without her, things accumulated. The correspondence began to back up. The accounts, which Nathaniel had assumed he could manage from Eleanor's ledger, turned out to contain a system of cross-referencing that existed entirely in her handwriting, and that he could not decode without her. The dinner for the Chandler family, which had been in Eleanor's diary and nowhere else, arrived on a Thursday evening to a household that had not prepared for them. He came downstairs one morning to find his mother in his study, the account books open on the desk in front of her. "These are a disaster," she said. "Eleanor kept those accounts. I am aware of that, which is precisely why they are a disaster." She looked up. "There is a system here, Nathaniel. I cannot make head or tail of it. I'll manage it. You don't know her system. Then I'll learn it." He closed the nearest ledger. He could feel her looking at him with the particular expression she reserved for situations where she was right, and had the patience to wait for everyone else to arrive at the same conclusion. "Mother, she's not coming back," Mrs. Hargreave said. "Not on her own. You don't know that. I know Eleanor Reed." She folded her hands on the desk. "I have been underestimating her since the day you brought her into this house. That is a mistake I am only just beginning to understand the full size of." She paused. "She said not to look for her. She meant it." He said nothing. "The question," his mother continued, with the measured deliberateness of a woman who has been building toward a point, "is whether you intend to respect that, or whether you intend to go after her." "She asked me not to." "Yes." Mrs. Hargreave stood. "And you have spent every evening this week in this study reading a note she wrote you. Half a page, Nathaniel. You have read it so many times the paper is wearing at the fold." She moved toward the door. She stopped without turning around. "What you said at dinner," she said, and her voice was different now, quieter, scraped down to something that sounded like honesty rather than management, "was beneath you. I did not say so at the time. I am saying so now." A pause. "Whether that changes anything is your business." She walked out. He stood alone in the study, with Eleanor's account ledger in his hands, and his mother's words rearranging themselves in the room around him. He opened the ledger. He looked at Eleanor's handwriting, the clean, precise, entirely legible system of a woman who had understood not just what the numbers meant but why they mattered. He saw, for the first time, not just what she had done but how she had thought about doing it. The foresight in it, the care. He stood there for a long time reading. The letter arrived in Ardmore on a Wednesday morning, 3 weeks after Eleanor had. It came through the post office, addressed in handwriting she recognized from 2 years of watching him sign timber contracts. Nathaniel's solicitor's handwriting was not Nathaniel's handwriting, but the instruction behind it was unmistakably his. She read it at the kitchen table while Frances poured tea. It was careful, formal language, the language of a man who understood exactly what his words meant and had chosen them with precision. It informed her that Mr. Hargreave wished to clarify certain matters pertaining to the assets of the marriage arrangement, including the Reed family medical instruments and library, which had been transferred as part of the arrangement, and whose status in the event of. Here the solicitor had written separation, and then crossed it out and written extended absence. Remained to be addressed. Her father's medical books. His instrument case. Eleanor read the letter twice. Then she folded it very carefully, set it on the table, and drank her tea. "Well," Frances said, "he sent his solicitor." Frances sat down. "Is he threatening to?" "No." Eleanor looked at the letter. "He's reminding me that those things are his now. My father's books, the instruments, everything that came with me. He's reminding me that the arrangement covered all of it. She picked up the letter and folded it smaller. I don't think he means it as a threat. I think he means it the way he means most things, as a clarification of the existing facts. What will you do? Eleanor was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that has weight to it. Nothing yet, she said. He wants to if the instruments will move me, whether the possibility of losing them will make me come back. She stood and tucked the letter into the pocket of her apron. Let him wonder. Frances stared at her daughter. Ellie, I know what I'm doing, Mama. She stopped. She turned back, and for just a moment the composure came down. Not all of it, not recklessly, but enough. Enough for Frances to see what was underneath it. Not fragility, but the particular ache of a woman who has been required to be strong for so long that she has almost forgotten what it felt like to be held by something other than her own resolve. I know enough, she said quietly. Right now, that's what I have, and it's what I need. Dr. Fenwick found her that afternoon in the back office, reorganizing the supply inventory. He watched her work for a moment before she noticed him. You all right? He asked. I'm fine. You've got the look of a woman who received a letter she didn't care for. She kept her eyes on the inventory list. Does it change anything here? No. Just wondering after you. She was quiet for a moment. My husband's solicitor wrote about my father's medical library. He settled into the chair by the window with the unhurried ease of a man who had learned over 70 years that most things worth knowing came out in their own time. And your husband? Is he the kind of man who leads with property? He's the kind of man who leads with what he understands, she said. Property, contracts, obligations, he understands those. She looked up from the inventory. People are harder for him. You sound like you're defending him. I'm describing him. There's a difference. She looked back at the list. I know the difference better than most. He studied her face for a long moment. He'll come, he said. Men like him always come, sooner or later. I know. What will you do when he does? She traced a line on the inventory page with her pen. Straight, certain, clear. I'll be someone different than the woman he married, she said. And he'll have to decide what to do with that. Different how? She was quiet for a moment. Then, very quietly, myself. Dr. Fenwick nodded slowly. He looked out the window at the Ardmore Street, at the ordinary afternoon going on without drama or significance. Well, he said, you'd better finish that inventory. We're expecting a supply delivery Thursday, and I cannot find the order form. She was already looking. The letter came on a Friday evening. She was walking back from a house call, a child with an ear infection 2 streets over. The kind of case where what was needed was less medicine and more someone to explain clearly to a frightened mother what was happening and what to do about it, when a rider she didn't recognize pulled up at the end of the main street. Mrs. Hargreave? He was young and dusty, and had the look of a man who had been riding longer than he'd expected. Yes. He reached into his coat and produced an envelope. Plain paper. Her name on the front in handwriting, she knew very well. She took it. She did not open it. Is there a reply expected? He said to wait for your answer, ma'am, if you had one. She looked at the envelope for a long moment. The evening light was doing something particular to the maple trees along the ridge, golden red, and the particular auburn that always made her think of something she couldn't quite name. She opened the letter. It was 3 lines. I said something at dinner that I have been unable to account for since. I am not asking you to come back. I am asking whether you would permit me to say what I should have said instead. N. She read it once. She folded it. She stood at the edge of the road with the letter in her hand and 3 weeks of herself. The version of herself she had been rebuilding carefully from the ground up, standing around her like something she was not willing to trade. She looked at the writer. Tell Mr. Hargreave I received his letter. He waited. And is that all, ma'am? She considered it for a long, careful moment. For now, she said. That's all. She walked back toward Widow Marsh's with the letter in her pocket and her chin level and her step even. She did not hurry. She did not look back. She thought instead about the supply delivery. About the patient files she still needed to sort. About the mother this afternoon who had said thank you with the full, straightforward relief of someone who had needed someone to tell them plainly what was true and had not expected to find it. She thought about what it meant to be a woman who solved the things in front of her and did not wait for someone else to decide they were worth solving. Her hands, she noticed as she reached the door of the boarding house, were not entirely steady. She breathed once, slow and careful, and went inside. Frances was at the table. She looked up and saw Eleanor's face. What happened? Eleanor set her bag down. She sat across from her mother. She put the letter on the table between them. Frances read it. She read it again. She set it down. Well, she said. Well, Eleanor agreed. What do you want? Frances asked. Not what's wise, not what's practical. What do you want? The question sat between them in the lamplight and required, for once, a completely honest answer. Eleanor looked at it for a long time. I don't know, she said at last. Frances blinked. In 35 years of knowing her daughter, she had heard those words perhaps twice. That's the most honest thing you've said since we arrived, she said quietly. I know what I don't want. Eleanor pressed her palms flat on the table. I don't want to go back to being convenient. I don't want to sit at a table and be described as a point. I don't want to manage a life for a man who looks through me the way you look through a window. She stopped. But she stopped again. What? She folded the letter and put it back in her pocket and stood up. Also nothing. Not tonight. She picked up her lamp. I'll write to him in the morning. Frances watched her go upstairs. She looked at the spot on the table where the letter had been, and her expression in the lamplight was that of a woman who understood exactly what also nothing contained. Whatever came next was going to be considerably more complicated than either of them was ready to say. Eleanor's reply was 4 sentences. She wrote it before Frances was awake, standing at the kitchen table with the lamp still burning from the night before. She read it once and sealed it before she could reconsider a word. Mr. Hargreave, I received your letter. I am not prepared to discuss what you should have said at a dinner table 3 weeks ago. If you have something to say, you know where I am. Whether you come is your decision, not mine. ERH. She sent it with the Morning Post and went to work. She told herself she had no particular expectation of what would follow. She was a moderate liar. Nathaniel Hargreave arrived in Ardmore on a Tuesday afternoon on a horse that had earned a long rest, and in a state of mind that had not. He had told himself for most of the 3-day ride that he was coming because of the instruments, because of the legal questions, because a man had certain responsibilities to the arrangements he had made, and those responsibilities required at minimum a conversation. He had composed sensible things to say. He had practiced them carefully, in his head, against the sound of the horse's hooves on the road north. By the time he reached the valley, he had stopped practicing. The first person he asked for directions was Mrs. Doyle, who was again hanging washing. She looked at him with the frank attention of a woman who had already met Eleanor and had formed a preliminary opinion of the husband based entirely on what the wife had chosen not to say about him. Mrs. Hargreave, he said. Can you tell me where to find her? Mrs. Doyle looked at his horse, looked at his clothes, looked at his face with the particular precision of a woman who had been reading people for 60 years, and found it more reliable than most other methods. She's at Dr. Fenwick's office. She pointed. Past the post office, before the hardware. A pause. She's in the middle of something. I'll wait. Mrs. Doyle looked at him for one more moment. See that you do, she said pleasantly, and went back to her washing. He heard Eleanor before he saw her. Her voice came through the open window of the office, clear, precise, carrying the specific authority of someone who was not performing authority, but simply had it. Mr. Bellamy, I understand you've been managing your father's medications yourself since March. I'm not suggesting you've done it incorrectly. I'm telling you there's a simpler way that will take you half the time and reduce the risk of missed doses. A pause. Will you let me show you? A man's voice cautious. My father doesn't like. I know. Dr. Fenwick mentioned it. Here's what I've found works with patients who are resistant to change. Nathaniel stood outside and listened to his wife explain something to a stranger with the patient. Specific, entirely unself-conscious confidence of a woman who was without question, precisely, where she was supposed to be. He had not known she could do this. He had not known because he had not asked. He had not asked because. And this was the part he had been sitting with for 3 weeks, turning it over in the dark of his study. He had not thought to. The door opened. Mr. Bellamy came out with the look of a man whose problem had been solved and who was still slightly surprised by this. Then Eleanor appeared in the doorway and saw Nathaniel. The room behind her went very still. He watched her face. That face he had looked at across a table for 2 years without ever really seeing, move through something. Not shock, not quite relief, something more complicated and more honest than either. Mr. Hargreave, she said. Mrs. Hargreave. He was aware of Dr. Fenwick visible over her shoulder, making no effort to look as though he wasn't paying close attention. I apologize for interrupting. We were nearly finished. She looked back at the office. Dr. Fenwick, I'll have the Bellamy notes written up before end of day. No hurry, Dr. Fenwick said, in the tone of a man who was extremely curious about what was going to happen next and intended to hear about it later. Eleanor stepped outside and closed the door. She and Nathaniel stood on the main street of Ardmore in the Tuesday afternoon, and the silence between them was not empty. It was full of 2 years of things neither of them had said, and 3 weeks of things that had happened since, and the specific weight of a conversation that both of them understood could not be had in front of the post office. "Walk with me," she said. They walked along the edge of the street toward the river path at the end of town. Eleanor set the pace. He followed it. "You came," she said. "You said if I had something to say, I knew where you were. I did say that. I have something to say." She kept walking. "Then say it," he said. He said it plainly. "I owe you an apology. What I said at dinner, I know what I said. I need to tell you it was wrong." "Wrong how?" She stopped. She turned to look at him with the steady, level attention she had always given him, the attention that now, after 3 weeks of understanding it better, he recognized as the clearest form of respect she offered. "Wrong because it wasn't true, or wrong because it was true and you should have kept it to yourself?" He opened his mouth. He closed it. He understood immediately that this was the only question that mattered and that he had not prepared for it. "Wrong," he said slowly. "Because even if it was how I thought of things, it should never have been how I thought of things. You were sitting right there. You have been sitting right there for 2 years, and I spoke about you as though you were a function." He looked at her. "You are not a function, Eleanor. You are not a point. And I said it at a table like it was nothing, like you were nothing, and I have been unable to account for it since." The river moved beside them. A red-winged blackbird landed briefly on a branch nearby and left again. "That's not quite an apology," she said finally. "That's a man explaining why he feels badly. He felt that one. What would an apology look like?" She looked at him for a long moment. Something moved in her face. Not forgiveness, not refusal, but the particular territory between two people who have hurt each other, and are trying to determine honestly what the map of it looks like. "I don't know yet," she said. "I haven't decided." Dr. Fenwick found Nathaniel sitting on the bench outside the post office an hour later. He had not gone looking for him. He had simply come to collect the afternoon mail, and found a man sitting with the expression of someone whose conversation had rearranged things, and who was waiting for the room to settle. Fenwick sat down beside him. "You're her husband," he said. "Herbert Fenwick. I know who you are." Nathaniel looked at him. "She's spoken of you, has she?" It wasn't quite a question. Fenwick looked out at the street. "She said you'd come. Said it probably. Said it the way she says things she's already worked out. Matter of fact." He paused. "She didn't say it meanly." Nathaniel was quiet. "How is she?" he asked. "Better than when she got here." Fenwick said it plainly. "She arrived carrying about 4 years more than she should have been. 2 weeks later, she'd reorganized a practice that's been sliding since my wife died, made 2 accurate diagnoses I'd been missing, because I didn't have time to look closely, and she's started teaching the young Bellamy boy to read the supply orders so there's someone else who can manage them." He paused. "She smiles now. Different than before, I'd guess." Nathaniel said nothing. The weight of that settled on him. "What do you want from her?" Fenwick asked. "And I mean that plainly. Not what you think you should want. What do you actually want?" Nathaniel looked at the main street of Ardmore, at the ordinary unhurried life of a small town going about its afternoon, at a woman he recognized as Mrs. Doyle talking to a man outside the hardware, laughing at something. "I want to know her," he said. And it surprised him, saying it aloud, how precisely true it was. "I have lived with Eleanor for 2 years and I do not know her. I did not try. I made an arrangement and I maintained it, and I told myself that was adequate." He paused. "It was not adequate." Fenwick looked at him for a long time. "No," he said. "It wasn't." He stood. "She's staying at Widow Marsh's. Mrs. Doyle has a room at the inn if you need it." He started walking. He stopped. "One more thing, Mr. Hargreave." "Yes." "She's not the woman you married." He said it without cruelty but clearly. "Whatever you thought you knew about Eleanor Reed, she's further along than that now. Don't make the mistake of talking to who she was." He walked away. Nathaniel sat on the bench for a long time. The next morning it was Francis who found him. He had not expected it. He was at the inn, finishing his breakfast, when Eleanor's mother appeared in the dining room doorway. He had not thought specifically about Francis since the night Eleanor left, had not considered what she had witnessed, what it had meant to her, what it had cost her to watch her daughter sit at that table for 2 years, and then pack her bag in 20 minutes. He stood. "Sit down, Nathaniel." She came in and sat across from him. She folded her hands on the table. She looked at him with the composed attention of a woman who had prepared herself for this conversation. "Before you say anything," she said, "I want to tell you something, and I need you to listen completely before you respond. Can you do that?" He nodded. "Eleanor's father came to your family to propose the arrangement," she said. "You know that part. What you don't know, what I asked Eleanor not to tell you, and she respected that, and I have regretted asking her for 2 years. Is that the week before the wedding? Your mother wrote Eleanor a letter. Nathaniel went very still. It was a polite letter, Frances continued. Your mother is always polite. It thanked Eleanor for her willingness to enter the arrangement. It outlined what would be expected of her. And then, in the final paragraph, in that particular way some people have of delivering something devastating, while sounding perfectly reasonable. It told Eleanor that you were entering the marriage for practical purposes, and not for sentiment, and that she should calibrate her expectations accordingly. She paused. She told my 23-year-old daughter 1 week before her wedding day not to expect to be loved. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. Eleanor read that letter, Frances said. She folded it and put it away, and she walked into that marriage anyway because she had made a commitment and she intended to honor it. She spent 2 years honoring a commitment that she had been told in writing, before it even began, would not be reciprocated. Her voice was even and absolutely controlled and absolutely furious beneath. She was not waiting to be loved, Nathaniel. She had stopped expecting it. She was waiting to be seen, that was all. To be seen once as herself, not as a function, a breath. And instead, at a dinner table in August, you told her she managed well enough, and that was the point of her. The silence that followed was enormous. I didn't know about the letter, he said. It came out rougher than he intended. I know you didn't. Frances looked at him. I am not telling you this to make you feel worse than you do. I am telling you because you came 3 days up the road and you are about to try to apologize to my daughter, and you cannot do that, honestly, if you don't understand the full weight of what you're apologizing for. She stood. She doesn't know I've told you. How you use it is your business. She moved to the door. Frances. She stopped. He looked at her. I am sorry for what she endured in that house, for what you endured, for the letter my mother wrote, and for never. He stopped. His throat did something inconvenient. For never asking. Frances looked at him for a long moment. Her expression was not forgiving. It was not cold. It was the expression of a woman watching something decide whether it's going to become something better, and reserving her verdict. That's a beginning, she said. She left. He found Eleanor at the office, which he was beginning to understand was where she always was. She looked at his face when she opened the door. One quick, clear look, and something shifted in her expression. What happened? My mother wrote you a letter, he said. Before the wedding, I didn't know about it. I know about it now. I need to hear it from you, what it said, in your own words, because I want to understand it properly, not second-hand. Her face changed. The composure went very still in a way that was different from her usual stillness. This was something older, something she had been keeping carefully in place for a long time and was now being asked to put down. Come inside, she said quietly. They sat in the back office, the one with the window that looked out onto the river, and Eleanor told him about the letter. She told him without dramatics, without tears, in the same clear and level voice she used for patient files and supply orders. Just the facts. The sequence. The specific words she remembered from a paragraph she had read on an October afternoon in 1889 and had never fully set down since. He listened. He did not interrupt. He did not defend. He sat across from her and listened to the account of the 2 years he had lived through from her side of them, and it was like looking at a house you had always lived in and realizing, in a different light, that it had contained things you had walked past 100 times without seeing. When she finished, the room was quiet. I should have told you, she said. You had no reason to believe it would have mattered to me. She looked at him. No, she said. I didn't. That landed the way it was meant to. I'm going to say something, he said, and I need you to hear it as what it is, not as what it resembles. He leaned forward slightly. I am sorry for the letter my mother wrote. I am sorry for what I said at dinner. I am sorry for 2 years of treating you as the arrangement rather than the person, for not asking, for not seeing. He stopped. For every morning I came downstairs and didn't say good morning. For every evening I let my mother say things and said nothing. For never once asking you what you wanted. His voice had gone rough at the edges. I am sorry for all of it, Eleanor. Every piece. She looked at him for a long time. I know you are, she said finally. Is that enough? The question sat between them. No, she said. Not yet. She stood. She moved to the window, not escaping, just needing the small distance of standing. But it is something. It is more than I expected. She paused. And that is not nothing. He stood too. I'm not asking you to come back tomorrow. I'm not asking you to forgive everything before you're ready. I'm asking. He stopped. He was, she realized, genuinely uncertain, not performing uncertainty, actually lost, in the specific way of a man who had lived inside confidence his whole life, and was standing, for the first time, without a plan. I'm asking for something I don't quite have the word for yet, Nathaniel. He looked at her. Why did you come? Not the apology. You could have written that. Why did you ride 3 days into Pictou County? He looked at his hands. Then at her. Because I could not stand not knowing where you were. She took a quiet breath. Because every morning I came downstairs, and the house was right, everything exactly right, and exactly wrong at the same time. And I didn't understand for 2 weeks why, and then I understood. He looked at her steadily. It is not the house I miss, Eleanor. It is you. Specifically, distinctly, you. A pause. I have never said that to anyone. I don't know what to do with it. But I am asking you to let me work it out. The room was very still. Eleanor Carter looked at her husband, this careful, proud, slow-to-arrive man, who had ridden 3 days into the Nova Scotia interior to say a thing he had never said to anyone, and she felt something shift in her chest that she had been keeping carefully still for a very long time. She did not let it move too far. She was not ready for too far yet, but she let it move. There's a community supper at the Doyle house on Saturday, she said. Her voice was quieter than usual. Half the town comes, it's informal. She looked at him. Come to supper, talk to people, see what this place is. A pause. And I'll think about what I want to tell you. That's all. For now, she said. That is everything. He nodded once. Slowly, the way a man nods when he is accepting terms he did not set, and knows that is exactly correct. Saturday. She moved to the office door with the quiet, self-possessed movement of a woman ending a conversation on her own terms. He picked up his hat. He walked to the door. He stopped on the threshold. Stopped, and turned back and looked at her with the full, open, undefended attention she had been waiting 2 years to receive. Good evening, Eleanor. He walked out into the Ardmore dusk. She stood alone in the back office with her hand on the doorframe and her heart doing something complicated and unscheduled, and she breathed exactly once, slow and careful, before she let herself feel any of it. She did not sleep well on Friday night. She lay in the narrow bed at Widow Marsh's and argued with herself in the honest way that goes on longer than expected and ends, as most honest arguments do, in a draw. Part of her said, he rode 3 days. He said you, specifically, distinctly you. He sat across from you and listened without defending himself, and did not as something. The other part said, 3 weeks ago. You were a function. Both parts were right. That was the difficulty. She was at the desk reviewing files by the time Frances came downstairs. You look terrible, Frances said. Thank you, Mama. Did you sleep at all? She moved a patient file to the left. I'm fine. You're fine the way a birch tree is fine, Frances said, pouring coffee. Standing upright and not admitting to anything. She sat down. He said something last night that landed, didn't he? Eleanor was quiet for a moment. He said he missed me specifically, she said, keeping her eyes on the file. Not the house, not the accounts. Me. Frances wrapped her hands around her cup. She said nothing, and I don't know yet if that's enough to build anything on. Eleanor looked up. But I know it was true. I could tell it was true, and that changes the shape of things somewhat. Somewhat, Frances repeated. Don't push me. I'm not pushing. I'm simply noting that you ironed your good dress last night, and you thought I was asleep. Eleanor looked at her mother. Frances looked back with the entirely unassailable composure of a woman holding a position she knows is correct. The supper is a community event, Eleanor said. It's appropriate to dress properly for a community event. Of course it is. That's all it is. Naturally. They looked at each other for a moment. Then Eleanor went back to her files and Frances went back to her coffee, and nothing more was said about the dress. The Doyle supper was held in the large back room of the house, which Mrs. Doyle had cleared and set with tables that held, by Eleanor's rough count, 37 people who all appeared to know each other well enough to be loud about it. By the time Eleanor and Frances arrived, the room was full and warm, and there were at least 4 different kinds of pie on the side table, all of them claiming to be the best pie at the supper. Eleanor had been in Ardmore long enough that people called her name when she came in. Mr. Bellamy's wife pressed a jar of wild blueberry preserves into her hands and said the system Eleanor had set up for her father-in-law's medications had already made a difference. Dr. Fenwick waved from across the room. 2 children ran past her knees and disappeared under a table. She was, for the first time in 2 years, somewhere she belonged. Nathaniel arrived 20 minutes later. He appeared in the doorway in the same clothes he'd been wearing all week. He had not, she noticed immediately, made any effort to dress above the occasion, and stood for a moment with the particular stillness of a man who has arrived somewhere he does not know the customs of, and is paying close attention before he moves. She watched him scan the room, watched him find her, watched something in his expression settle, not relax, not quite, but settle, the way a compass finds its bearing. She lifted her chin. He crossed the room. Mrs. Hargreave. Mr. Hargreave. She handed him a plate. Eat something before Mr. Bellamy gets to the blueberry pie. He has no restraint whatsoever. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. He looked at the plate. He looked at her. I'll keep that in mind. Over the next 2 hours, Eleanor discovered that her husband was, when removed from the architecture of the Hargreave house, and placed among people who knew nothing about his family or his timber contracts, a person. Not a monument, not an arrangement. A person at a table, which was a manageable thing. He was talking to Dr. Fenwick when she checked on him an hour in. Fenwick with the look of a man conducting a thorough and interested assessment. Nathaniel with the look of a man who knew he was being assessed, and had decided not to pretend otherwise. What's he asking you? She said to Fenwick. How a man who started as a ship's carpenter ended up a country doctor, Fenwick said pleasantly. And what I said was, a man ends up where he's needed, not where he planned. She looked at Nathaniel. And what did you say to that? I said it was a more interesting answer than I'd expected. He looked at her. I said it was more interesting than any conversation I'd had at a dinner table in Halifax in the past 5 years. She looked at him for a moment. That may not be a very high bar. No, he said. I'm beginning to understand that. Fenwick, watching this exchange with quiet attention, filed it away for later consideration and refilled his own glass. The first real laugh came from a completely unremarkable cause and at a completely unexpected moment, which Eleanor would later decide was exactly right. It was Mrs. Doyle's doing, technically. Mrs. Doyle had decided the evening required dancing and had recruited her husband and his fiddle. And the furniture had been pushed back and there were perhaps 6 couples on the floor. And Mrs. Doyle had turned to Nathaniel with the beaming confidence of a woman who had decided he was going to participate whether he intended to or not. You dance, Mr. Hargreave? Nathaniel looked at the cleared floor. He looked at Eleanor. She looked back at him with the composed expression of a woman watching to see what he would do. I know how, he said carefully. That's all you need. Mrs. Doyle stepped back in the way of a woman who had successfully deployed this argument many times before. Nathaniel turned to Eleanor. He held out his hand. He did it without ceremony, just the offered hand and the question in his eyes that he didn't put into words. She looked at his hand. She took it. They had danced twice before, at formal occasions in Halifax, both times with the careful spatial precision of 2 people who did not know each other well enough to be comfortable in proximity. This time the fiddle was less refined and the floor was uneven, and Mrs. Doyle kept sweeping past them in enthusiastic circles. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, something shifted. He turned her slightly faster than the step required, because Mrs. Doyle was coming around from the left, and Eleanor caught his arm to keep her balance, and it was just slightly too close and slightly too quick, and she laughed before she could stop herself. Not the polite, controlled laughter she had learned to produce in drawing rooms. Real laughter, surprised, unprepared, rising from somewhere below her throat. He looked down at her, and then he laughed too. It came out of him like something that had not been used in some time, a little uncertain, a little rusty at the edges, but completely real. Your elbow, she managed. Mrs. Doyle was, your elbow, Nathaniel. He looked. His elbow had in fact done something inadvisable in the vicinity of her hair. He straightened it. Her hair was slightly disarranged. She fixed it with one hand without letting go of his other one, and they stood for a moment in the middle of the Doyle back room with the fiddle still going and Mrs. Doyle spinning past them, and the particular stillness that exists inside a loud room when 2 people find each other's eyes. Eleanor, he said, quietly enough that only she could hear. Don't, she said, just as quietly. Not yet. She paused. Just dance. He nodded. He took her hand again, and for one unguarded, unscheduled song, they were simply 2 people figuring out the distance between them. Frances, from her chair against the wall, watched with her hands folded in her lap and said a quiet, specific, motherly prayer. The letter from his mother arrived Sunday morning and it was 4 pages long. Eleanor read it at the kitchen table while Frances watched her face. Page 1. The household. The cook had given notice. The Chandler family correspondence required a response. The gutters on the north side needed attending before winter. Practical matters, which Eleanor read through without expression. Page 2. Nathaniel. His mother's concern for his extended absence expressed in the particular layered way. She expressed concern, not directly, but in the accumulation of questions that each implied an answer she preferred not to state aloud. Was he eating properly? Did he understand that certain business could not wait indefinitely? Had he considered what the situation looked like from outside? Eleanor's expression did not change. Page 3 contained something that made her read it twice. She set the letter down. "What is it?" Frances asked. "She's had the Reed instruments and library appraised." Eleanor's voice was even. "An appraiser from Halifax," she says. "The medical instruments my father accumulated over 30 years of practice." She paused. "She says the collection is worth considerably more than she had understood when the marriage arrangement was made. That certain pieces are quite rare." She looked up. "She is suggesting, in language that is technically very polite, that this changes certain considerations." Frances stared at her. "She's saying your father didn't know what he was giving away. She's saying my father negotiated debt relief in exchange for something he did not fully understand the value of." Eleanor's voice remained entirely level, and that Nathaniel's family benefited from that without fully disclosing it. Frances pressed her hand flat on the table. "Ellie, did she know? When the arrangement was made, did she?" "She doesn't say." They looked at each other. "I need to talk to Nathaniel," Eleanor said. She found him at the inn. He looked at her face and put down his hat. "What happened?" She handed him the letter. He read it. She watched his face change, slowly, honestly, without performance. He set the letter on the table. "I didn't know about the appraisal," he said. "I didn't know the collection was worth more than." "Did your mother?" He was quiet for a long time, long enough that the answer was already present before the words arrived. "I don't know," he said. "Honestly, Eleanor, I don't know." "I need you to believe that." "Then find out first," she said. "And then we'll talk." He wrote to his mother that afternoon, directly without softening it. He asked whether she had known the value of the Reed medical collection prior to the arrangement, and he asked it in terms that made clear he was not looking for a careful answer. Her reply came in 2 days, 1 paragraph. She had been advised by a colleague that certain items in the collection had particular value. She had believed the arrangement served multiple interests and had proceeded accordingly. She regretted if this now presented a complication. He brought the letter to Eleanor, without a word. She read it. She folded it. "She arranged a marriage that secured something of considerable value from a family that didn't understand what they had," Eleanor said. "And she wrote to me before the wedding to make sure I understood it was a practical transaction, and I should not expect anything more." She looked at Nathaniel. "She managed everything." "From the beginning." "Yes," he said. The word came out of him like something being set down after a long time carrying it. "She did, and I allowed it. I was comfortable, and she was capable, and I did not look closely at what was being done in my name." He looked at her directly. "That is my failure, not hers. Mine. I was the one who didn't ask the questions I should have asked." She looked at him for a long assessing moment. "The instruments," she said. "The library. What do you intend to do?" "They're yours," he said, simply, without negotiation. "Your father built that collection over 30 years. It came into the arrangement because your family didn't understand its value, and it should go back to your family. I'll have the transfer drawn up however you want. Your name, your mother's, both." He paused. "I should have looked more carefully at the beginning. At what the arrangement was actually asking of your family. I did not look. I'm looking now, and I'm going to make it right." He met her eyes. "It's late, I know it's late." Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. She was looking at him, the way she looked at patient files when something didn't add up, searching carefully for where the true line was. She found it. "Sit," she said. "I'll make tea, we have things to discuss." They talked for 3 hours. Not about the instruments. After the first 30 minutes, those arrangements settled quickly, efficiently, between two people who understood what was fair and intended to act accordingly. They talked about everything else. He asked about her father. She told him, about the man Edmund Reed had been, about the practice built on 30 years of house calls, made in all weather, about the particular grief of watching something you love dismantle itself, slowly through no fault of anyone's good intentions. She told him about learning to take a pulse at age 8 on a Saturday morning, with bad tea between them. She told him about the year the money began to go wrong, and how her father had known before he admitted it, and how she had known that he knew. He listened. He did not summarize, he did not offer solutions. He listened with the full, unhurried, genuinely interested attention she had spent 2 years waiting for. And she talked until she was empty of it and sat quietly on the other side of the silence. Then he asked, "What do you love to read?" She looked at him. "I realized," he said, "that I don't know. I have lived with you for 2 years, and I cannot answer that question." He was looking at her with the steady, open eyes of a man who had decided to stop managing the distance. "I'm asking it now." She looked at him for a moment that went longer than expected. "Medicine," she said. "Medical literature, case studies, the kind of practical writing that changes how a person thinks about a problem." She paused. And poetry. Late at night when I can't sleep. Not the grand kind. The kind that says something small and true. Who? Pauline Johnson, Lampman. Sometimes someone I find in a journal that nobody's ever heard of. She tilted her head slightly. You're making a list. He looked startled. I'm not. You are. You get a particular expression when you're committing something to memory. And something in her voice was softer than either of them had been prepared for. You've had it twice in the last 10 minutes. He was quiet for a moment. You've been watching me carefully, he said. I've been watching you for 2 years, she said. What else was I going to do? The weight of that settled on him. He sat with it. I want to ask you something, he said carefully, and I want you to answer honestly, not carefully, just honestly. All right, are you happy here? He looked at her. Not compared to Halifax, not relatively. Are you actually happy, in this place, this life you've made in 3 weeks? She didn't answer immediately. She let the question sit. She looked at the office around her, the patient files, the supply ledger, Fenwick's old desk that had become something like hers over the past weeks, the sound of Ardmore outside the window, Francis's handwriting on the appointment book, adding a note about tomorrow's first patient. Yes, she said, I am. Good. Something in his voice underneath the single word sounded like relief, like something that had been held very tightly, releasing. Then whatever comes next, wherever you decide you want to be, I want you to keep that. I don't want to be the reason you're smaller than you ought to be. He paused. I've done that once. I won't do it again. She looked at him. When you go back to Halifax, she said, and stopped. If, he said, not correcting her, just offering the alternative. She looked at him. If, he said again more quietly, the words sat between them. If. Open. Provisional. The most honest word available to a man who was finished pretending he knew how this ended. She stood. She moved to the window. She'd stopped with her hand on the frame. That same position, that same gesture, and looked out at the Ardmore Street in the late afternoon. Come to the community meeting Thursday, she said. Mr. Bellamy's easement dispute. I've been working on it. You want me there? She looked back at him. I think you'd find it instructive, she said, to see what it looks like when something is handled fairly. When the right line is drawn and everyone walks away knowing exactly where they stand. He held her gaze. I'll be there, he said. She nodded. She walked out. She got as far as the street before she realized her hands were not entirely steady. She stood in the August afternoon and breathed the Ardmore air and told herself to be patient. She had been practicing patience for 2 years. She was very good at it by now. She was beginning to think that patience was not, after all, the same thing as waiting. Thursday's meeting went exactly as she had prepared for, which meant it went entirely differently than expected, and ended correctly anyway. Mr. Bellamy had a last-minute question about the recorded width of the easement. The neighbor produced a deed she had not seen. The measurements in 3 different documents disagreed with each other by margins that individually seemed small, and collectively made an enormous difference. Abigail stood in the middle of it, with her voice steady, and her mind moving through the problem with the particular combination of patience and precision that had become, over 5 weeks in Ardmore, her way of working. She laid the documents next to each other on the table. She explained the discrepancy. She identified which record was the most recent official filing and why it superseded the others. She proposed a resolution that gave each party something they needed and required no one to admit they had been wrong, which was always, in her experience, the resolution most likely to hold. Nathaniel watched all of it from the edge of the group. He did not intervene. He did not offer opinions. He watched the way she moved through the problem, the way she listened, the way she understood what each person actually needed, as opposed to what they were saying they needed, and the way she navigated between those two things with the deft, unhurried competence of someone who had always been capable of this, and was only now being allowed the room to show it. When the documents were folded and the handshakes had been made, and the 3 parties had left looking like people whose problem had been solved rather than decided, he came to stand beside her. She was putting her papers in order without looking up. Well, she said. He was quiet for a moment. Your father taught you this, he said. Some of it. The rest I've worked out myself. He taught you well. She looked up. He was looking at her with the full, open, unguarded expression she had seen only a few times, once on the river path, once in the back office. The expression of a man who has stopped managing what his face does. I know I have a long way to go, he said. I'm not asking you to forget any of it. I know what the last 2 years were. I'm asking. He looked at the easement documents, neatly stacked, the problem resolved and ready to file. I'm asking to be in the same place as you for a while, doing whatever is useful, not as an arrangement. Just, he stopped. Just, she said. He looked at her. Just present. She considered him. The gutters on the north side of Dr. Fenwick's office need cleaning before the weather changes, she said. He can't manage the ladder himself. He blinked. I beg your pardon? I told him last week I'd find someone. She began walking, folder under her arm. It's half a day's work, maybe more. I imagine you're capable of it. He caught up with her in 2 strides. You want me to clean gutters? I want to see, she said, not slowing down, whether you're the kind of man who will. She heard something from him that might, if she had been listening at exactly the right angle, have been the beginning of a laugh. He cleaned the gutters on Friday. He showed up at 7 in the morning with his coat already folded over the fence and cleaned them with the focused, thorough competence of a man who had done physical work before and wasn't embarrassed about knowing how. By noon the north side was done. By 4 o'clock, the whole office looked like it would manage the winter without difficulty. Eleanor passed on her way back from a house call. She stopped. She looked at the work. She looked at Nathaniel. Dusty, entirely unself-conscious, squinting at a final section he wanted to check again. She stood there longer than she had intended. Francis, walking behind her, came level with her shoulder, looked at Nathaniel, looked at Eleanor's face, and said nothing. Which was, Eleanor thought, the most eloquent thing Francis had said all week. Nathaniel finished. He climbed down. He saw her. Well, she said. Well, he agreed. She looked at the gutters. She looked at him. It'll hold, she said. It'll hold for 30 years. She looked at him for a moment, and something that had been very carefully still inside her for a long time moved again, the same way it had moved in the back office and on the river path, the same slow, quiet shift of something deciding whether to trust the ground. She wasn't entirely ready. She knew that. She had more to work out, more to ask for, more to make sure of before she could be ready in the full and honest sense. But she was readier than she had been 3 weeks ago. Readier than she had been at that dinner table. Readier than she had been when she packed her bag in 20 minutes and walked out into the August night. There's supper at the Doyles again tonight, she said. If you want to come. He looked at her. Is that an invitation? It's a supper, she said. You're welcome to be there. He picked up his coat. They walked down the Ardmore Street in the early evening, not quite side by side, not quite separate, in the careful, honest, provisional way of 2 people who were still working out the distance but had at least agreed to work on it together. The answer to what came next arrived not in a single conversation, but in the slow accumulation of small true things. The way answers to the questions that matter usually do. It arrived in the evenings at the Doyle supper table, where Nathaniel asked Dr. Fenwick questions about medicine he'd never thought to ask before, and listened to the answers with the full attention. Eleanor had come to understand was what he looked like when he was actually present in a room. In the mornings when he began walking to the office with her, because he was going that way, and it was the natural thing to do. And they talked about the day ahead, about the cases she was working on, and he asked the kinds of questions that meant he had been listening. In the afternoon he spent with Mr. Bellamy's father, not at Eleanor's request, but because he had thought of it himself, and had asked the old man 3 questions about his life before the man's health had complicated things, and had come back with the specific information that changed how Eleanor understood the medical situation. It arrived in the moment she came back from a call one evening, and found him and Francis at the kitchen table with her father's medical reference books open between them. Francis explaining something about diagnostic methodology, in terms that made sense to someone without a medical background, and Nathaniel taking notes. Not performing attentiveness. Actually learning. It arrived in the conversation they had on a quiet Sunday morning when the town was sitting on the bench outside the post office with coffee from Mrs. Doyle, and she said, "If I come back." If. There are conditions. Tell me, he said. She told him. The accounts, managed jointly, transparently, with full information shared. The instruments and the library, transferred to her mother's name, legally and permanently. The household. Decisions made with her voice equal to his, not filtered through his mother's preferences. Her work protected, not as an exception or a courtesy, but as a fact of the arrangement. Ardmore, hers to return to, regularly, for the cases in the community she had built here. She talked for 15 minutes. She did not soften it. He said, "Yes, Nathaniel. Yes, Eleanor. All of it." He looked at her across the morning air, across the 3 weeks and the 3 days and the 2 years between them. "Yes, because I mean it. Not because I want this conversation to end. I mean every condition." He paused. "I want you to come home, not to what it was, to what it can be with you actually in it, fully, the way you've been here." Another pause. "I want to know what you love to read. I want to know what you're thinking at breakfast." I want you to talk to me the way you talk to Fenwick and to Bellamy and to everyone in this town who has known you for 5 weeks and somehow managed to understand you better than I did after 2 years. He stopped. I want to be worth talking to. She looked at him. This man who had ridden 3 days into the interior and cleaned gutters and taken notes at a kitchen table, and was now asking, with more genuine humility than she had thought him capable of, to be given the chance to be worth something to her. She thought about the woman who had folded her napkin and walked upstairs and packed a bag in 20 minutes. She thought about what that woman had known and what she had been willing to give up to find out whether she was right to know it. She thought about the past 5 weeks and what she had built and who she had become in the building. She was not going to give any of that up. She knew that with the clean certainty of someone who has found something real and intends to hold it. The question was whether she could hold it and also reach toward this. Whether those two things could exist in the same life without one diminishing the other. She thought they could. She thought he was becoming, slowly, honestly, imperfectly, someone who would make sure they could. One more thing, she said. Anything. If we go back. When we go back, I'm keeping Ardmore. Dr. Fenwick needs someone to manage the practice correspondence and I intend to keep doing it. I'll come up quarterly. More if there's a case that needs me. She looked at him steadily. This is not a negotiation, this is what happens. He didn't hesitate. Of course. I mean it, Nathaniel, I know you do. He looked at her. So do I. She held his gaze for a long moment, long enough to read it the way she read a patient file when the numbers weren't adding up. Looking for the true line, the place where it held. She found, all right, she said. He reached across the bench between them. Not quickly, carefully, with the deliberateness of a man who was certain, and his hand covered hers. She turned her hand over and held it. They sat like that for a moment, on a bench outside the Ardmore post office, with the September morning coming in clear and cool off the ridge, holding on in the quiet, ordinary, completely real way of two people who have finally, after a long time and considerable difficulty, found the true line. They left Ardmore on a Saturday at the end of September, all 3 of them, because Frances had decided she was going back to Halifax with them, and no one had argued, because no one had wanted to. Eleanor climbed into the coach last. She stopped at the door and turned back to look at the town for a moment. The main street, the post office, Fenwick's office window, Mrs. Doyle waving from her front step. I'll be back in December, she called to Mrs. Doyle. Tell Dr. Fenwick the Bellamy correspondence is filed under B and not under the date. He'll file it under the date anyway, Mrs. Doyle called back. I know. Tell him anyway. She climbed in. The coach moved. She did not look back, not because she was leaving Ardmore behind, but because she knew, with the clean, certain knowledge she reserved for things that were simply true, that she was carrying it with her. Everything she had built here, everything she had become here. It was in her as surely as her father's books and her mother's cameo. Not a place she had been, but a self she had found. She was not going back. She was going forward. And she knew the difference. The first morning home, she came downstairs to find Nathaniel already at the breakfast table. He looked up. Good morning, he said. Good morning. She sat down. He had already poured her coffee. He set it at her place without a word. She looked at the cup. She picked it up. What are your plans today? She said. He looked at her with the straightforward, present attention that she had come to understand was what he looked like when he was actually there. The accounts need reviewing, and I thought this afternoon you might look at the property correspondence with me. There are 2 letters I'm not certain how to answer. I have time after 2. After 2 then. He went back to his letters. She reached for her bread. She opened the small notebook she'd taken to carrying. The room was neither cold nor managed. It was simply inhabited by 2 people sitting at the same table, talking, for once, as though they both intended to be there. Mrs. Hargreave the elder appeared in the doorway 20 minutes later. She looked at the table, at Nathaniel with his correspondence, at Eleanor with her bread and her notebook, and the coffee she'd half finished. Something moved in her expression. Brief, and quickly returned to its usual place, but present. She sat down. The collection, she said. I've confirmed the transfer with the solicitor. Your mother should receive the formal documents by the end of the week. Eleanor looked up. Thank you. It was the right thing. Mrs. Hargreave reached for the coffee pot. She poured her cup. She did not say anything else. It was not a peace. It was not a transformation. It was 2 women at a table, on a Tuesday morning in October, having decided, with full understanding of what they were deciding, that the future was worth more than the argument. Nathaniel looked up from his correspondence. He looked at his mother. He looked at his wife. He went back to his letters. He was, very quietly, smiling. That evening, Eleanor sat at the writing desk in the room that was now properly and entirely her own study. The first thing she had asked for when they returned, and the first thing Nathaniel had arranged, and she wrote to Dr. Fenwick. She told him the Bellamy easement was holding, and the Marsh property dispute was nearly resolved. She told him she'd be back in December with notes on 2 new cases she'd been following up by correspondence. She told him Francis was well, and the Halifax air was its usual complicated self, and the breakfast table was, on balance, considerably quieter and considerably better than it had been when she had last sat at it. She signed it, she sealed it, she set it with the Morning Post. Then she sat for a moment in her own study, in her own chair at her own desk, and she thought about a dinner table in August, and a napkin folded with great care, and a woman who had walked out of a room without looking back. She had walked out knowing what she was worth. She had come back having proved it. Not to Nathaniel, not to Mrs. Hargreave, not to anyone else, to herself. That was the only proof that had ever mattered. The woman who had sat at that table waiting to be seen was gone. She was not coming back. In her place was a woman who saw herself clearly, who knew, with the precision of someone who had done the survey herself, exactly where the true line was, and intended to hold it. Not against the people she loved, alongside them, as herself. And that was the only boundary that had ever needed to be drawn.